The trading post at Red Hollow smelled of tobacco, leather, and desperation. Abby Miller stood in the corner shadows, her arms wrapped protectively around herself, trying to become invisible. She had perfected this art over 23 years of life, the art of disappearing while still remaining in plain sight. Her father, Jacob Miller, slouched against the counter, his breath already heavy with whiskey, though noon had barely passed. The pelts he'd brought to trade were scraggly, poorly cured. Everyone knew Jacob was a terrible trapper, a worse father, and the kind of man who blamed the world for his own failures. The door swung open, letting in a shaft of golden autumn light and a man who seemed carved from the mountains themselves. Sawyer McKenna stood 6'3", with shoulders that had been broadened by years of hauling beaver traps and bear pelts. His dark hair fell past his collar, and his beard was trimmed close to a face weathered by wind and solitude. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who needed nothing from civilization. McKenna. Jacob straightened, his eyes lighting with the particular gleam of a man sensing opportunity. Heard you had good season up north. Sawyer nodded curtly, setting down a bundle wrapped in oiled canvas. Inside were pelts that made the trader's eyes widen. Thick beaver, pristine fox, and a massive bear hide that would fetch a fortune in St. Louis. Need supplies? Sawyer's voice was deep, economical with words. And I'll take that roan mare in your stable if the price is fair. Jacob's mind raced. He owed money throughout the territory. The mare was the only thing of value he owned, but this mountain man had wealth in furs. An idea formed, cruel and calculating. Tell you what, Jacob said, forcing joviality into his voice. I'll give you the mare, and I'll throw in my daughter, too. She's strong, can cook, clean. She'd make a good wife for a man living alone. Abby's blood turned to ice. From her corner, she watched her father gesture toward her as if she were livestock. The dozen men in the trading post had gone quiet, watching. Sawyer's gaze shifted to Abby for the first time. She stood there, round-faced and full-figured, in a dress that had been let out so many times the seams showed like scars. Her dark hair was pulled back severely. Her eyes, intelligent and wounded, met his for just a moment before dropping to the floor. Something flickered across Sawyer's face. Pity? Disgust? Abby couldn't tell, but she braced herself for the words she'd heard in variations her entire life. I'll take the horse, Sawyer said slowly, his voice carrying through the silent room, but keep your fat daughter. The trading post erupted in laughter, rough, cruel laughter that crashed over Abby like a wave. She had been humiliated before, countless times, but never quite like this. Never so publicly, so completely. She looked up once more and caught Sawyer's eyes. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw regret there, but then he turned away, completing his transaction with cold efficiency. Jacob's face purpled with rage and embarrassment. He snatched the coin Sawyer offered for the mare, his hands shaking with fury. Abby remained frozen in her corner, watching as Sawyer McKenna gathered his supplies, claimed the roan mare, and walked out of her life as abruptly as he'd entered it. Through the window, she watched him ride north, toward the mountains that rose like a wall between civilization and wilderness. She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt something worse than humiliation. She felt the confirmation of every terrible thing she'd ever believed about herself. Even a mountain man living in complete isolation had rejected her. She wasn't even worth the minor inconvenience of taking her along. "Useless!" Jacob hissed at her as the crowd dispersed. "Can't even get yourself married off when handed to a man on a silver platter." Abby said nothing. She had learned long ago that words only made things worse. That night, huddled in the small room off the kitchen that served as her quarters, she stared at the ceiling and wondered if there would ever be a place in the world where she belonged. 3 days after the incident at the trading post, the first snow began to fall. It came early that year, catching everyone by surprise. Abby watched it through the small window of the stable where Jacob had locked her. The punishment had been building since the humiliation at Red Hollow. Jacob had drunk himself into a rage, ranting about worthless daughters and wasted opportunities. When Abby had tried to serve dinner, he'd backhanded her hard enough to split her lip. "You want to be stubborn?" he'd snarled. "You want to make me look like a fool? Fine, you can sleep with the animals since you're too good to be a mountain man's wife." He'd dragged her to the stable, thrown a thin blanket at her, and locked the door from the outside. The roan mare was gone, traded away, but there was still Jacob's old mule and a milk cow. Their warmth was the only thing keeping the temperature above freezing. Abby pressed her bleeding lip with her sleeve and tried not to cry. Crying never helped. It only gave Jacob satisfaction. The snow had been light at first, but by evening it had intensified. Wind howled through the cracks in the stable walls. Abby huddled in the corner on a pile of hay, the blanket pulled tight around her shoulders, and watched her breath form clouds in the freezing air. She could die out here, she realized. If the storm was bad enough, if Jacob stayed drunk enough, he might not even remember she was locked in the stable. She thought about calling out, begging, but pride, the last thing she had left, kept her silent. The night deepened. The temperature plummeted. Abby's fingers and toes went numb despite her efforts to keep moving. She thought about her mother, dead these 10 years, and wondered if there was anything after this life, anything better than Red Hollow and a father who saw her as nothing but a burden. She must have dozed off because she woke to the sound of the stable door shaking. At first she thought Jacob had come, but the voice that called through the wind was different. "Anyone in there?" Abby stumbled to her feet, her stiff legs barely holding her. "Here, I'm here." The lock rattled. There was a sharp crack as something heavy struck the door, and then it swung open, letting in a blast of snow and the silhouette of a man on horseback. Jesus Christ! Sawyer McKenna swung down from his horse, the roan mare he'd purchased. "What the hell are you doing locked in here?" Abby couldn't form words. Her teeth chattered too violently. Sawyer moved quickly, wrapping his heavy fur coat around her and lifting her onto his horse as if she weighed nothing. His strength was absolute, born of years surviving in the wilderness. "Where's your father?" he demanded. "D drunk?" Abby managed. "Inside." Sawyer's jaw clenched. He looked toward the house, where dim light showed through the windows, then at the storm intensifying around them. "This is going to get worse before it gets better. We need to move." "Where?" "My cabin. It's 3 miles up the mountain." "I can't—" He'll what? Lock you in a stable to freeze to death?" Sawyer's anger was cold, controlled. "I'm taking you out of here. You can decide what happens next after you're alive to make the choice." He mounted behind her, his arms coming around to grip the reins, his body blocking the worst of the wind. The horse struggled through snow that was already knee-deep, following a trail that Sawyer seemed to know by instinct more than sight. Abby faded in and out of consciousness. She was aware of the horse's labored breathing, the iron strength of the arms holding her upright, the way Sawyer's voice rumbled against her back as he spoke to the mare, encouraging her forward. Time became meaningless. There was only cold and wind and the slowly fading hope that they would reach shelter before the storm claimed them both. Then, miraculously, there was warmth. Abby felt herself being carried, heard a door close, shutting out the wind's howl. She was lowered onto something soft, a bed with actual blankets. A fire roared to life in a hearth, casting orange light across log walls. "Don't fall asleep yet." Sawyer's face appeared above her, his eyes intense. "Need to make sure you're not frostbitten." He removed her frozen boots, his hands gentle but efficient, checking her feet and hands. "Toes are pink. That's good. Can you feel this?" He pressed her fingertips. Abby nodded, sensation slowly returning with painful tingles. "Good." He wrapped her feet in wool blankets and tucked additional furs around her. "You're going to feel worse before you feel better. That's normal. I'm making tea." Abby watched him move around the cabin with practiced ease. It was a single large room, immaculately organized. Shelves lined one wall, filled with supplies. Drying herbs hung from the rafters. A table sat near the hearth with 2 chairs. Pelts were stacked neatly in one corner. Everything spoke of a man who had made peace with solitude. He brought her tea in a tin cup, bitter and hot. She wrapped her shaking hands around it, grateful for the warmth. "Why did you come back?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Sawyer was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Couldn't stop thinking about what your father said at the trading post, the way he offered you up like property." He paused. "And about what I said. That was cruel. I shouldn't have—" He broke off, jaw tight. "You spoke the truth," Abby said quietly. "No." His eyes found hers, fierce. "I spoke like a man who'd forgotten his humanity. I've been alone too long. I came back to apologize. Found your father passed out drunk and you locked in that stable." His hands clenched. "If I'd been any later—" "But you weren't." Abby felt tears, hot and unexpected, slide down her cheeks. "You saved me." The storm raged for 3 days. During that time, Abby's body revolted against the near freezing it had endured. Fever set in on the 2nd day. She shook with chills despite the fire and the furs piled atop her. In her delirium, she called out for her mother, relived memories of childhood cruelties, begged forgiveness for crimes she'd never committed. Sawyer tended her with quiet competence. He made broths from dried meat and herbs, coaxing her to drink even when she turned away. He changed the cool cloths on her forehead, kept the fire burning, spoke in low tones that somehow anchored her when fever tried to pull her under completely. On the 3rd day, her fever broke. Abby woke clear-headed for the first time since arriving at the cabin. Dawn light filtered through the window, illuminating Sawyer asleep in the chair beside the bed, his head tipped back, dark circles under his eyes. He had stayed awake, she realized. For 3 days he had barely slept, watching over her. This man who had rejected her so harshly at the trading post had risked his life to save her, and then sat vigil to ensure she survived. "You're awake." His eyes opened, immediately alert, despite his exhaustion. "Thanks to you," Abby said softly. As her strength returned, Abby insisted on making herself useful. Sawyer had protested, but she was stubborn. She needed to do something, to feel less like a burden and more like a person with value. She cooked, discovering that Sawyer's supplies included basics she could transform into proper meals. She mended the tears in his shirts where thorns had caught them. She organized his herbs, recognizing some from her mother's garden years ago. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Sawyer asked the question she'd been dreading. "What was your life like in Red Hollow?" Abby stared into her cup of tea, searching for words. "Lonely?" she finally said. "My mother died when I was 13. After that, it was just Jacob and me. He blamed me for her death. She died birthing a son who didn't survive. Jacob always wanted a son." "That's not your fault." "I know, but knowing doesn't change what he believes." She took a shaky breath. "The other children in town, they were cruel about my size. Fat Abby, they called me. Said I ate too much, moved too slow. The boys would moo at me like a cow." Sawyer's hands tightened on his cup, but he said nothing, letting her continue. "I thought it would get better when I was grown, that maybe someone would see past." She gestured vaguely at herself. "But the men in town either ignored me or made me the subject of jokes. Jacob tried to marry me off 3 times. Each time, the men rejected me once they saw me." "Bastards," Sawyer muttered. "They were honest," Abby said. "No one wants a wife who looks like me. I'm not pretty. I'm not graceful. I take up too much space in a world that wants women to be small and delicate." "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." Sawyer's voice was sharp. "You know what I see. A woman who survived being locked in a freezing stable during a blizzard, who got up after 3 days of fever and insisted on cooking and cleaning despite still being weak, who's got kindness in her eyes despite every reason to be bitter." He leaned forward. "That's worth a hell of a lot more than being small and delicate." Abby felt her throat tighten. She'd spent her whole life believing she was worthless. Hearing someone, especially someone like Sawyer, say otherwise felt dangerous, like hope. And hope had only ever led to disappointment. "Why did you say what you said at the trading post?" she asked quietly. "About keeping me." Sawyer's face shuddered. "Because I'm a coward." It took 2 more days before Sawyer shared his story. They were splitting wood outside. Abby had insisted on helping despite the cold, when he suddenly stopped, axe in hand, staring at the mountains. "I had a wife once," he said, "Elizabeth, and a daughter, Sarah. She was 4 years old." Abby went very still. "We lived in Missouri. I had a farm, neighbors, a church we went to on Sundays. Normal life." His voice was flat, emotionless, but his knuckles were white on the axe handle. "There was a fever that winter, scarlet fever. It swept through the county." "They both?" Abby couldn't finish the question. "Within 3 days of each other. Sarah first. She was so small in that coffin." Sawyer's voice cracked. "Elizabeth! She couldn't survive losing Sarah. Her heart just gave up. Or maybe she didn't want to survive. I don't know. I'm so sorry. I sold the farm. Couldn't stand to be there anymore. Everywhere I looked, I saw them. Sarah's toys, Elizabeth's garden. I just walked away. Headed west and kept going until I found these mountains. Been here 5 years now." "And you've been alone all that time?" "Alone is safe," Sawyer said. "Alone means nobody else dies on you. Can't lose what you don't have." Understanding crashed over Abby. "That's why you said no at the trading post. Not because of how I look, but because you didn't want to care about someone again," Sawyer finished. "To risk feeling that kind of pain again." He finally looked at her. But then I couldn't stop thinking about you, about the look in your eyes when your father offered you up and I rejected you. And I realized being cruel to protect myself from pain was just another kind of cowardice. You're not a coward, Abby said firmly. You came back in a blizzard to apologize. You saved my life. Maybe. Sawyer returned to splitting wood. But I've got a long way to go before I'm the man I used to be. Winter deepened, and the snow made travel to Red Hollow impossible. Abby told herself she was stranded, forced to stay in the cabin by necessity. But in truth, she had no desire to return to her father's house. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. Sawyer and Abby developed a rhythm, a domestic partnership that felt natural despite how recently they'd met. They took turns cooking, sharing chores, spending evenings by the fire reading from the small collection of books Sawyer owned, or simply talking. One morning, Abby woke to find a package wrapped in cloth beside her bed. Inside was a coat, beautifully made from tanned deerskin, lined with rabbit fur. The stitching was careful, each seam perfect. "You made this?" she asked Sawyer at breakfast, her throat tight with emotion. He shrugged, suddenly awkward. "Gets cold up here. Figured you needed something warmer than that thin shawl you came with." But Abby could see the care in every stitch. This coat had taken days to make. Sawyer had done this for her, spending hours by candlelight working on something just to keep her warm. She responded in kind. She noticed Sawyer's favorite foods and made sure to prepare them. When she discovered he loved apple pie but had no apples, she used precious dried berries and honey to create something similar that made his eyes light up when he tasted it. She mended his clothes with extra care, adding small decorative stitches that served no function except beauty. She organized his cabin not just functionally, but thoughtfully, creating a space that felt more like a home and less like a survival station. One evening, she caught him watching her as she worked on some sewing, a look on his face she couldn't quite interpret. When their eyes met, he looked away quickly, color rising in his cheeks. It was endearing, seeing this powerful mountain man flustered. She realized with a start that she was falling in love with him. The night it all nearly changed, they were sitting by the fire after dinner. Snow fell heavily outside, muffling the world. Inside the cabin, there was only warmth, flickering light, and the comfortable silence of two people who had learned to exist together. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Sawyer said suddenly. Abby looked up from her sewing, surprised. "Why?" "Because I want to know you. The real you, not just the person Red Hollow saw." Abby set down her work, considering. "I used to dream about being beautiful," she admitted quietly. "Not for anyone else, but just to see what it felt like. To walk into a room and have people's faces light up instead of looking away. To be wanted." "You are wanted," Sawyer said, his voice rough. "By who?" The silence stretched between them, charged with everything neither of them dared say. Sawyer leaned forward, his eyes intense in the firelight. "Abby, he started, reaching toward her. "Don't," she whispered, even as her heart screamed at her to let him continue. "Don't say something you'll regret tomorrow." "What if I won't regret it?" "You will." Abby stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. "Because eventually, Sawyer, you'll wake up and see me the way everyone else does, and I won't survive that. Not from you." She retreated to her bed, pulled the curtain Sawyer had hung for privacy, and lay there in the darkness, tears sliding silently down her face. She heard him sit by the fire for hours, heard the whiskey bottle clink against his cup once, twice, then no more. Neither of them slept well that night, separated by only a few feet of cabin, but miles of fear. Spring came reluctantly to the mountains, melting snow revealing the brown earth beneath. Abby knew she couldn't avoid the inevitable forever. Eventually, she would have to make a decision. Return to Red Hollow or what? Stay here with Sawyer? That felt like asking for a gift she didn't deserve. The decision was made for her one morning in early April. "Abby!" Sawyer burst into the cabin where she was preparing lunch. "We've got company, multiple riders heading up the trail." Abby's stomach dropped. "Jacob?" "Looks like it, and he's brought friends." Through the window, she could see them, 5 men on horseback, Jacob in the lead, looking gaunt and furious. They stopped 100 yards from the cabin, close enough to shout, but not close enough to be an immediate threat. "McKenna!" Jacob's voice echoed off the rocks. "I know you've got my daughter in there. Send her out, and we'll have no trouble." Sawyer stepped outside, rifle held loose but ready. "Your daughter's an adult woman. She can make her own choices." "She's my property until she's married," Jacob spat. "And I've found a buyer willing to take her off my hands. Man down in Texas needs a wife, doesn't care what she looks like long as she can work. He's paid good money, and I aim to deliver." Abby went cold. He was selling her, actually selling her like livestock. "Not happening," Sawyer called back. "Leave, now, before this gets ugly." "You got no claim on her, mountain man. Less than 6 months ago, you told the whole town you didn't want her. Nothing's changed." "Everything's changed," Sawyer said quietly, but his voice carried. "And if you try to take her, you'll find out exactly how much." Jacob's face purpled with rage. He turned to his companions, rough men, probably hired with promises of whiskey and coin. "Get her!" The men charged. Sawyer's rifle barked once, kicking up dirt in front of the lead horse. The animal reared, throwing its rider. The others pulled up short. "Next shot won't be a warning." Sawyer levered another round. "Abby stays. That's final." Jacob and his men retreated, but only temporarily. For 3 days, they made camp at the base of the trail, clearly waiting for an opportunity. Sawyer kept watch, sleeping in shifts, making sure they couldn't approach the cabin without warning. On the 4th night, a different threat arrived. 4 mountain hunters, hard men who ran illegal whiskey and traded stolen goods, stumbled upon the cabin. They were drunk, dangerous, and looking for trouble. Well, well, the leader, a scarred man named Pike, pushed into the cabin despite Sawyer's attempt to block the door. "Heard there was a woman up here. Got to be pretty desperate to hole up with McKenna. Maybe you'd like better company, sweetheart." "Get out!" Sawyer's voice was deadly calm, the tone of a man prepared for violence. "Or what? You'll take all 4 of us?" Pike laughed. "We just want a little hospitality. Food, maybe some company." Abby stepped forward, putting herself between the hunters and Sawyer. Her heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "You need to leave, now." Pike's eyes raked over her dismissively. "Look at the size of you. Bet you eat enough for 3 men? No wonder he's keeping you hidden up here, only place you'd find a husband." "I said leave." Abby's voice cracked like a whip. Something in her tone, years of accumulated rage at being dismissed and demeaned, made Pike take an involuntary step back. "The lady asked you to leave." Sawyer moved beside Abby, and in that moment they were a unit. "Won't ask again." The drunk courage drained from Pike's face as he registered the cold promise in Sawyer's eyes. These were mountain men, yes, but Sawyer was something different, something more dangerous. "Come on," Pike muttered to his companions. "Crazy fools deserve each other." They stumbled out, and Sawyer barred the door behind them. In the silence that followed, he turned to Abby. "You were brave," he said softly. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Brave and terrified aren't opposites." Sawyer reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand. "Abby, I need to say something, and I need you to listen." "I know what I said in Red Hollow." Sawyer's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, his eyes locked on hers. "But every day since I brought you here, I've regretted those words more, not because they were cruel, though they were, but because they were lies I told myself." "Sawyer, please let me finish." He took a shaky breath. "I was attracted to you the moment I saw you, terrified of it, so I lashed out. I convinced myself I was protecting my heart by pushing you away. But these months with you, watching you laugh, seeing your kindness, your strength, I've fallen in love with you, Abby. Completely, irreversibly in love." Abby's vision blurred with tears. "You can't mean that." "I've never meant anything more." Sawyer cupped her face gently. "You're beautiful. Not despite your size, not in spite of anything. Just beautiful, exactly as you are. And if you'll have me, if you can forgive the cruel fool I was, I'd be honored to call you my wife." "I'm afraid," Abby whispered. "Afraid you'll wake up one day and regret this. Regret me." "Never." Sawyer's voice was fierce. "I've lost people I loved, and it nearly destroyed me. But I realized something these past months. Not loving again because I'm afraid of loss. That's not living. That's just existing. You've taught me the difference." Abby couldn't hold back any more. She threw her arms around him, and Sawyer held her tight, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When they finally pulled back, Sawyer leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met softly at first, tentative, then deepening into a kiss that felt like a promise of belonging, of home, of a love that had fought through fear to bloom. They married in May, when the mountain meadows erupted in wildflowers. There was no preacher, no formal ceremony. Instead, they stood on the ridge above Sawyer's cabin at sunrise, the entire mountain range spread before them like a cathedral. "I, Sawyer McKenna, take you, Abby Miller, to be my wife," Sawyer said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I promise to see you, truly see you, every day for the rest of our lives, to honor your strength, your kindness, your beauty, to build a life with you based not on fear, but on love." Abby's voice shook, but she met his eyes steadily. "I, Abby Miller, take you, Sawyer McKenna, to be my husband. I promise to trust in your love even when old fears whisper otherwise, to stand beside you in joy and hardship, to build a home where both of us can heal and grow." Sawyer slipped a ring onto her finger, simple silver he'd crafted himself, etched with mountain peaks. Abby had made him a matching band from braided leather and silver wire. "Are we married?" Abby asked softly. "In every way that matters." Sawyer pulled her close. "Though we can ride down to the preacher in Willow Creek next month if you want it official." "Next month," Abby agreed, then laughed, the sound bright with joy. "I'm married. I'm actually married. To a reformed fool who's going to spend every day making up for those words in Red Hollow." "You've already made up for them." Abby touched his face gently. "You saved me, Sawyer, in every possible way." They spent the summer building their life together. Sawyer taught Abby to trap and hunt, to read the signs of weather in the mountains, to move through the forest quietly. Abby taught him to find joy in small domestic pleasures, fresh bread, a garden planted near the cabin, flowers on the table. One afternoon in August, Jacob appeared at the cabin alone. He looked older, diminished. "Came to see my daughter," he said gruffly. Sawyer's hand went to his rifle, but Abby touched his arm. "It's okay." She stepped outside to face her father. "What do you want?" "Heard you got married." To him. Jacob jerked his chin toward Sawyer. "Yes." "You happy?" The question surprised her. Abby considered lying, then decided he deserved the truth. "Happier than I've ever been in my life." Jacob was silent for a long moment. "Your mother, she'd be glad." "I was wrong, Abby, about a lot of things, especially about you." "Yes, you were." Abby's voice was firm. She wouldn't pretend years of cruelty away with one conversation. "I won't bother you again." Jacob mounted his horse. "Just wanted you to know I'm sorry for all of it." He rode away, and Abby let him go. Forgiveness might come someday, or it might not. But she refused to let his presence steal even a moment of her hard-won joy. The following spring, Abby felt the first flutter of movement in her belly. Dr. Harrison from Willow Creek confirmed what she already knew. She was pregnant. Sawyer's reaction was everything she'd hoped for. He pressed his hand gently to her stomach, awe written across his face. "A baby. Are you scared?" Abby asked quietly. She knew about Sarah, about the daughter he'd lost. Terrified, Sawyer admitted, but also grateful that I get another chance, that you're giving me this. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Abby swelled and ached, struggling with the mountain heat and her own anxieties. But Sawyer was steadfast, attentive without being overbearing, present in every moment. On a cold December night, with the first real snow of winter falling, Abby's labor began. Dr. Harrison had arrived 2 weeks earlier, staying in the cabin's small loft, anticipating the birth. 12 hours later, as dawn broke pink and gold over the mountains, their daughter was born. She came into the world screaming, red-faced and perfect. "Eleanor," Abby whispered, cradling the tiny bundle, "after my mother." Sawyer sat beside the bed, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. When Abby placed Eleanor in his arms, he held her with infinite tenderness, his large hands impossibly gentle. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your papa, and I promise to love you and your mama with everything I have, every single day." Watching him, Abby felt a completeness she'd never imagined possible. This man who had once rejected her with cruel words now held their daughter with such love it took her breath away. They had both been broken people, him by loss, her by rejection, and somehow, impossibly, they had healed each other. Outside, the snow fell softly on the mountain that had become their home. Inside, in a cabin filled with warmth and love, a new family began their story. 3 souls who had been lost had found each other, and in doing so, had found themselves. The mountain man who'd said he wanted nothing but solitude had learned to love again. The woman who'd believed herself unworthy of love had discovered her own strength and value. And a tiny girl named Eleanor would grow up knowing nothing but acceptance and devotion. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unlikely packages. Sometimes love grows in the hardest soil, and sometimes the words that hurt the most become the catalyst for the greatest transformation. Sawyer McKenna had once said, "I'll take the horse, but keep your fat daughter." But love had changed his mind, his heart, and his entire life. And in the end, the mountain man discovered that the greatest wealth wasn't in pelts or solitude. It was in the family he'd found in the most unexpected way.